Welcome back to discussion number 11, where we will be talking about the poetry overview that you read for today, as well as the selected poems that you read as well. As we go through this discussion video today, it will be really helpful for you to have the poetry overview out in front of you, as well as the Sarah Sylvia Cynthia Stout poem, which is at the end of the selected readings, as that is the one that we'll be discussing today. And then you'll get to pick a poem that you want to identify and analyze later on in the video for your actual discussion portion. Alright, so I want to go over just a few rules about reading poetry aloud, and so these are things that will help you when you're reading these poems, whether it's for this class or for when you're working with students, how to make your poetry sound better orally performed. So we're going to talk about punctuation mostly with this, and of course there's a lot of different ways that you can make sure that the poetry that you're reading aloud is sounding good in the way that it should, but we're just going to talk about punctuation here very quickly, and then I also encourage you, once we've talked about these, to go back and actually read the poetry that we read for today aloud rather than just reading it within your head, because I think when you follow the guidelines with the punctuation, it might sound a lot different. So a reminder that a period or a question mark or an exclamation point at the end of a line means a full stop. So you would take a breath as if it was the end of a sentence. A comma means a very slight pause, just like a comma would with anything that you're reading in general. And then no punctuation means to keep going, no pause. So if there's no punctuation at the end of the line, you keep going to the next line. There's no pause in between. So I want you to keep this in mind as we look at Sarah Sylvia Cynthia Stout for today as well. So I'm actually going to read this poem aloud because most poetry is meant to be read aloud, and I think you'll get a better experience and understanding of what this poem means if I read it aloud. And I encourage you to also later on pause this video and read it out loud to yourself, or if you have kiddos at home, that would be great too, so they get a sense of what it sounds like and you get a great sense of what it sounds like as well. Sarah Sylvia Cynthia Stout would not take the garbage out. She'd scour the pots and scrape the pans, candy the yams and spice the hams, and although her daddy would scream and shout, she simply would not take the garbage out. And so it piled up to the ceilings, coffee grounds, potato peelings, brown bananas, rotten peas, chunks of sour cottage cheese. It filled the can, it covered the floor, it cracked the window and it blocked the door, with bacon rinds and chicken bones, drippy ends of ice cream cones, prune pits, peach pits, orange peel, floppy clumps of cold oatmeal, pizza crusts with withered greens, soggy beans, and tangerines, crusts of black-burned buttered toast, gristly bits of beefy roast. Garbage rolled on down the hall. It raised the roof, it broke the wall. Greasy napkins, cookie crumbs, globs of gooey bubble gum, cellophane of green bologna, rubbery blubbery macaroni, peanut butter caked and dried, curdled milk and crusts of pie, moldy melons, dried up mustard, eggshells mixed with lemon custard, cold French fries and rancid meat, yellow clumps of cream of wheat. At last the garbage reached so high that finally it touched the sky, and all the neighbors moved away, and none of her friends would come into play. And finally Sarah Sylvia Cynthia Stout said, "Okay, I'll take the garbage out." But then, of course, it was too late. The garbage reached across the state, from New York to the Golden Gate, and there in the garbage she did hate. Poor Sarah met an awful fate that I cannot right now relate, because the hour is much too late. But children, remember Sarah Stout, and always take the garbage out. So I really like this poem because there's not only a lovely imagery used throughout this poem, but it's also a lot of fun to say. And I think adults and children find the use of language that's used in this poem really, really fun. So I want to talk just about a few different types of literary elements that are used in here with sound patterns to make this poem really fun to say, but also I want to talk a little bit about the effect that it has and the mood that it creates for the reader themselves. The first thing that I really love in this poem is that there is a lot of alliteration that kind of comes as like a tongue twister, and of course an alliteration is that repetition of the first sound in a word. There's Sarah Sylvia Cynthia Stout, which is repeated multiple times throughout the story, but there is also this lovely bit down here where we have prune pits, peach pits, orange peel, which is kind of a tongue twister, and it's also got that huh sound that's really fun as well. We also have a really great one down here as well, Blackburn Buttered Toast. Again, has kind of that hard p sound that's fun to say as well. Something else that's going on throughout here is there is quite a bit of assonance. So we have candy, the yams, and spice, the hams. And assonance is the repetition of a vowel sound within the middle of a word. So we have that sound. And then we've also got it throughout as well down here. So where we have the gristly bits, we've got the sound. And I'm sure that there's quite a few more in as well. Those are just a couple that I wanted to show you. And then the last one that I wanted to talk about is consonants, which is the repetition of a consonant sound within the middle of a word. So right here we have cracked and blocked. And then over here we kind of have a combination of not only assonants but also consonants with cellophane and baloney. So we've got the L sound and we also have the O sound as well. So a good way that I remember this is consonants is a consonant, and that sounds really similar. An assonant starts with an A, and A is a vowel. So that's something that will probably come up on your midterm, so keep that in mind. So I want to talk a little bit about the mood that this poem creates for the reader as you're reading it along. With the repetition of Sarah Sylvia Cynthia Stout, we've got a little bit of rhythm, and it keeps the rhythm going as well and kind of makes it even seem to go faster. The other thing is that you have this comma, list of things that are happening on top of each other. So it almost gives you that idea of the garbage piling up and piling up and piling up. So once you're reading it out loud and you've got all the commas going, and so you take this small, very, very small breath, but you keep reading along, that gives the idea of that this garbage keeps building and building is something that's eventually going to fall. The other thing that's really cool throughout this poem is that there's rhyming couplets throughout until we get to this point. So we have away and play, and then we have, and finally Sarah Cynthia Stout said, and it ends with out, right? So there's a bit of a difference there. It almost seems like this is the moment where this garbage pile kind of falls over and is just too big, too massive, okay? So we have this kind of jolting moment where the sound in the poem is a lot different, where it's been these couplets before where two lines end the same. So in these kind of end differently. The other thing that I think is interesting is at the beginning of the story we have Cynthia Sylvia Stout, and then right here we have a smaller version of her name, and then at the end we have just her first and last name. I don't really have a reason for why that is there, but I think it is really interesting, and it's something about how this character is changing throughout the course of this poem because they won't take the garbage out. So that's all I'm really going to say about this poem. I think it's a really fun poem. I think Shel Silverstein is a great poet and has a lot of great nonsense poetry. So I would highly recommend using that in your classroom. This is a great example, and so hopefully this has helped you kind of see the ways that sound patterns work within poems, and gives you an idea of the mood that it creates from those sound patterns.